In the quiet before sunrise, when the world still clung to its last drifting dreams, the whispered announcement moved like a thin ribbon of breath across an unseen distance. It was not spoken by any person, nor carried on any familiar wind. Instead, it rose from the subtle tremble of things that were usually silent, the faint hum behind the walls, the low shifting of the air, the soft tightening and loosening of spaces that never drew attention to themselves. Anyone awake enough might have paused, sensing something approaching, not loud, not clear, but unmistakably intentional, as though reality itself had exhaled a secret that it had been holding for far too long. It traveled through the early dimness like a soft strand of meaning, brushing past the corners of rooms, touching the cool surfaces of windows, and settling over the slow pulse of those who slept. It was not a warning, nor a celebration, nor anything as simple as a message meant for the mind. Instead, it felt like a shift in the deep background of existence, a movement so gentle that a person might only feel it as a sudden urge to breathe more slowly or turn in their sleep toward a quieter comfort. The world, in that subtle moment, seemed to steady itself, preparing for something small yet significant to be understood. Though no one could say why, the announcement felt as though it belonged to everyone and no one at the same time. It carried neither urgency nor demand, only an unspoken invitation to notice the smallest details again, the way the light crawled along the floorboards, the faint echo in the space between thoughts, the delicate balance between sound and silence. It did not ask for belief, only awareness, as if reminding the world that beneath all noise and hurry, a deeper rhythm continued to guide everything in slow, thoughtful waves. Outside, the earliest hints of morning gathered along the horizon, yet they too seemed to hesitate, as if they were waiting for the whispered announcement to fully settle before allowing the day to begin. Birds that usually began their songs with sharp insistence now perched quietly, listening with bright, steady eyes. Leaves, still heavy with night's coolness, barely stirred. Even the roads, which usually hummed faintly with distant engines, seemed to hold their breath in gentle suspension. Something unseen had pressed its fingertip lightly against the fabric of dawn. Those who happened to be awake during this mysterious shift felt it differently. Some sensed a strange calmness settling into their bones, a reassurance without a definite source. Others felt a slow, tender pull toward memories long forgotten, not painful ones, but the soft, reassuring fragments of childhood mornings or quiet evenings shared with someone who once mattered deeply. A few felt as though they had overheard a delicate truth, though they could not recall the words even moments later. Yet all of them knew, in an instinctive and almost physical way, that something meaningful had begun. In rooms lit only by the thin glow of digital clocks, sleepers stirred in unplanned synchrony. A sigh escaped here, a hand relaxed there, dreams changed direction like slow-moving tides. The whispered announcement curled around them, not loud enough to wake them, but gentle enough to guide the edges of their dreaming minds toward quieter shores. It soothed worries they hadn't spoken aloud, polished the rough corners of lingering fears, and encouraged their thoughts to drift toward warmth, toward rest, toward peace. The announcement did not fade quickly. Instead, it lingered like a fine mist, clinging to the unseen spaces where emotion and intuition touched. It seeped into the delicate creases of routine, the way someone prepared tea before dawn, the moment a child reached for a blanket, the slow rising breath of someone turning toward the window in their sleep. Each small detail, unnoticed on any ordinary day, seemed gently illuminated from within, not by light, but by meaning. As though the world itself wished to remind everyone that the smallest things were often the most profound. As the morning grew a little brighter, yet still quiet enough that shadows stretched without hurry, the whispered announcement slid into the spaces between thoughts, encouraging even the most restless minds to slow down. People who usually woke with a jolt found themselves rising more gently, blinking into the dimness with a strange feeling that the world had shifted while they dreamed. They could not name the difference, but they felt it, a new softness in the air, a subtle promise resting just beyond the edge of awareness. Even animals responded. Cats raised their heads with slow, curious calm instead of their usual sharp alertness. Dogs dreamed more deeply, paws twitching as if running through landscapes washed in quiet light. Birds tilted their heads as though trying to sense a pulse beneath the soil. The announcement touched all living things equally, not as a command or a suggestion, but as a shared moment of recognition, a reminder of the deep, interconnected hum that ran beneath every breath taken on Earth. And still, no source revealed itself. It did not need to. Its purpose was not to deliver instructions or revelations, but to press gently on the threshold between consciousness and mystery. It reminded the world that even the faintest whisper could carry immense weight if one allowed themselves to listen. It lingered like a soft imprint on the day, ready to guide anyone who noticed toward a slightly different way of moving, thinking, or simply being present. By mid-morning, when the sun finally stretched its warm fingers across the waking world, the whispered announcement had softened into a memory that couldn't be fully recalled. People went about their tasks with quieter hearts, unaware that they were still carrying the gentle shift within them. Yet the morning felt smoother somehow, as if friction had been quietly reduced in the workings of reality. Small frustrations failed to cling. Moments of beauty lasted a breath longer. Thoughts arranged themselves more kindly. Some people found themselves pausing without knowing why, looking out windows, turning their faces toward a breeze, or running their fingers along the grain of a wooden table as though rediscovering its texture. These pauses were brief, but they were the announcement at work, still whispering beneath the noise of the day. It had woven itself into the subtle behavior of anyone who had been near enough to feel its passage. As the hours passed, the announcement continued its quiet work. It settled into conversations, allowing people to listen a little more carefully, to speak a little more gently. It shaped the tone of laughter, softened the edge of irritations, and allowed space for a kind of attentiveness that often evaporated in the rush of days. Even those deep in their obligations, carrying boxes, typing rapidly, cleaning meticulously, felt a small clarity in their actions, as though each task held a slightly renewed purpose. It moved through crowded rooms just as easily as it had drifted through sleeping homes. A person standing in a long line might find themselves breathing with unexpected ease. Someone overwhelmed by thoughts might feel a rare moment of stillness seep into their chest. A child, mid-tantrum, might slow their sobs more quickly than usual, pulled back to calm by something they could not name. The announcement had become part of the unseen architecture of the day. Later, when daylight began to shift toward evening's softer gold, the whispered announcement took on a gentler form, like a memory dimming at the edges but still glowing faintly at its center. It moved through shadows stretching long across familiar ground, encouraging a kind of reflection that came not from thinking, but from simply feeling. People lingered a bit longer in doorways, paused longer before turning off lights, and allowed themselves a moment of inward quiet before the evening routines continued. Even as night returned, slowly, patiently, as though honoring what the morning had brought, something of the announcement remained in the air. It drifted through the cooling atmosphere, settling once again over rooftops, fields, and the spaces between thoughts. Stars emerged above, silent but bright, looking almost closer than usual, as if they too were listening to the subtle message that had woven itself into the day's fabric. In bedrooms once more darkened and still, the whispered announcement resumed its gentle presence. It curled into the spaces where dreams would soon grow, preparing the night with the same quiet intention it had carried before dawn. The world, in its slow rotation, felt slightly more aligned, slightly more weightless, as though some small tension in its vast frame had been eased by the invisible message that had washed across it hours earlier. Sleep returned to people in softer waves, guided not by exhaustion but by a quiet willingness to rest. The announcement, though nearly unnoticeable now, continued its delicate work, settling into hearts with the patience of something that understood time differently. It did not fade completely, It simply became part of the night's breath, mingling with the cool air and the gentle rustle of curtains stirred by midnight breezes. And so the cycle continued, not with grand declarations or dramatic events, but with a steady, almost imperceptible influence. The whispered announcement had not come to change the world immediately, but to remind it of something essential, that not all messages needed volume, urgency, or clarity to matter. Some simply needed to be felt, carried quietly through the day, allowed to settle into the spaces where words could not reach. Long after the day ended, and long after people drifted into dreams shaped by calm instead of tension, the whispered announcement waited, patient as a heartbeat. It knew it would rise again when the world was quiet enough to listen, in the thin moments before sunrise, when everything was delicate and open, and when a single breath of meaning could reshape an entire day without anyone ever realizing exactly how or why. The story of how the pictures were gathered began long before anyone realized what they were seeing. It started with a slow accumulation of signals, faint and fractured, traveling over enormous distances and slipping into the patient receivers that waited through endless nights. These receivers were not glamorous machines. They hummed softly in quiet rooms, blinking with small indicators that only a handful of people ever paid attention to. Yet they were always listening, always alert, like keepers of fragile secrets drifting through dark seas. When the first picture began to form, it was no more than a slight pattern among noise, a barely there whisper rising out of static, asking to be recognized. What made these pictures extraordinary was not their sharpness but their unlikely journey. Every piece of data they contained had traveled through layers of cosmic silence, passing fields of dust, invisible currents of radiation, and stretches of emptiness so vast that even light seemed to move cautiously. The pictures didn't arrive whole, they arrived in slivers, each fragment shaped by the long passage across distances that defied ordinary understanding. Some fragments came clean, others came bruised by interference, and many arrived with no context at all. But the receivers kept collecting, gathering each piece as though it were a small, precious shard of a puzzle scattered across the universe. The people who worked with these fragments understood that patience was the true engine behind every discovery. Many nights, they sat in dim control rooms, lit mostly by monitors displaying endless lines of data that rarely resolved into anything meaningful. They listened to the rhythmic beep of systems storing each incoming bit, and they reminded themselves that great revelations often began with monotony. Slowly, the fragments formed patterns, tiny clusters that hinted at shapes, textures, and structures. It was like listening to the softest footsteps on another world and trying to imagine the landscape beneath them. In time, software sifted through the avalanche of information, identifying slivers that seemed to belong together. Algorithms worked like careful weavers, pulling threads of data into loose clusters. These clusters were examined piece by piece, sometimes by machines, sometimes by human eyes sharpened by long hours of quiet observation. Every cluster carried its own challenges. Some were riddled with gaps so wide that reconstructing them felt like trying to rebuild a cracked vase by knowing only two of its curves. Others were dense, strangely heavy with information, as if they had absorbed something the machines couldn't fully interpret. The first assembled picture was not beautiful. It looked like a hazy smear, a half-formed shape flickering with uncertainty. But it held a pulse, a suggestion of detail that made the researchers stop, breathe, and understand that they were witnessing the first faint bridge between worlds. They refined the tools, adjusted the filters, and let the machines dig deeper into the whispered information embedded across the fragments. Each enhancement brought the picture into slightly clearer focus, revealing edges where only blur had existed before. As the process continued, more pictures emerged, each one clearer than the last. Some arrived as long streaks of light that needed to be corrected for cosmic drift. Others came warped from passing near unseen gravity wells, requiring careful untwisting to restore them to their intended form. The team began to recognize the quiet rhythm of the universe's imperfections, the tiny distortions, the gentle asymmetries, the subtle fingerprints of cosmic forces that shaped everything passing through them. Though machines performed much of the work, it was human intuition that ultimately stitched the pictures into meaning. A person could look at a faint, uncertain shape and sense that it belonged to a larger structure the data alone couldn't easily describe. It was a slow dance between calculation and instinct, between measurable signals and the delicate art of interpretation. Each completed picture held a subtle warmth, as though infused with the long patience of the hands and minds that coaxed it into clarity. The process was often frustrating. Hours of work could lead to dead ends, where two pieces that seemed similar proved incompatible, or when new data contradicted earlier assumptions. Yet the team learned to embrace the uncertainty, recognizing that it was woven into every discovery worth making. The universe seldom revealed anything cleanly. It preferred riddles layered within riddles, prompting those who studied it to slow down, reconsider, and allow themselves to be guided by curiosity rather than expectation. Some pictures arrived so riddled with noise that it took days to recover even a small sliver of their true form. The noise was not random, it carried whispers of other events, particles colliding, waves intersecting, fragments of distant storms traveling across the cosmic ocean. Each layer had to be peeled back carefully, like brushing dust away from an ancient artifact. Sometimes, when the dust finally cleared, what appeared on the screen startled everyone present with its fragile beauty. Other pictures arrived smoothly, almost too smoothly, as though something had protected them during their long journey. These were studied with a different kind of caution, for overly perfect data made scientists nervous. Nature was rarely perfect, and when it appeared so, it demanded a deeper look for hidden complexities. Still, there was something deeply reassuring in seeing a picture emerge with fewer scars, as if the universe occasionally allowed a moment of effortless translation. As more images accumulated, patterns began to connect across great spans of space and meaning. It became clear that no single picture held the story lived in the relationships between them, in the subtle connections that stretched from one to another like quiet threads. A small detail in one image resonated with a faint edge in another, forming a bridge no one had expected. The pictures were not isolated snapshots, they were pieces of a much larger conversation whispered across unimaginable distances. Sometimes, the technicians working the night shifts would pause during their routine checks, noticing how the newest pictures carried a strange kind of stillness, as though they had traveled through regions untouched by turbulence. At other times, the pictures throbbed with visual noise that felt almost alive. Those nights, the control room hummed with a different kind of anticipation, the sense that something unusual, something slightly beyond ordinary understanding, was brushing near their instruments. As the archive grew, it grew not just in quantity but in character. Each image carried its own tone, some cold, others warm, some rigid, others strangely fluid. The team learned to read these tones, understanding that they were shaped by cosmic conditions the way a photograph on Earth might be shaped by weather, temperature, or the angle of the sun. These tones gave the pictures an unspoken emotional dimension, as though each one carried not just information, but also the memory of the path it had taken. Over months of careful gathering, the process became almost meditative. The work demanded long stretches of silence, steady breathing, and a willingness to follow faint trails without any promise of clarity. The researchers often found themselves slipping into a kind of calm attentiveness, where the world outside the dim control rooms faded away, leaving only the soft glow of screens and the gentle, rhythmic arrival of information from far beyond. The pictures gradually formed a sequence, though not a linear one. They overlapped, echoed, and sometimes contradicted one another. But within their differences, something consistent began to emerge: a theme, a shape, an idea the universe seemed to be offering in quiet gestures rather than declarations. Piecing these images together became less like assembling a puzzle and more like learning a new language, one spoken not with sound but with the texture of light and shadow. Each time a new picture arrived, the team approached it with the same mix of caution and wonder. They knew that every fragment, no matter how small, carried the potential to shift their understanding. Some fragments contained improbable details that forced them to revise earlier interpretations. Others confirmed long-held theories. Many simply deepened the mystery, adding layers rather than removing them. But every picture mattered, because every picture carried a trace of somewhere distant and unseen. Late nights became the most productive hours. The quiet allowed the researchers to hear the subtle rhythm of incoming data more clearly. It was during these hours that some of the most compelling images were assembled, born from a combination of machine precision and human concentration sharpened by the stillness surrounding them. The results often felt unreal, as though the pictures were emerging from a dream woven jointly by the universe and the watchers who waited for it. As the process reached a steady rhythm, the archive transformed from a mere collection of images into something resembling a map not of physical terrain, but of attention, of intention, of something vast reaching gently toward understanding. The researchers did not claim to fully grasp the message woven through the pictures, but they sensed a kind of coherence, a soft pattern that suggested these images were not random glimpses but part of a larger unfolding. Eventually, even the newest team members began to notice that each picture carried an emotional resonance, faint but unmistakable. It was as if the universe, in sending these fragile visual murmurs across unthinkable distances, had infused them with a quiet patience, the same patience required to receive them. The pictures felt like long-held breaths finally released, or forgotten memories returning after ages of silence. Though the work continued, the team realized that understanding was not the final goal. The act of gathering itself held its own significance. Each image was a testament to the deep connection between the watchers and the watched, between those who listened and the cosmos that, in its own slow and distant way, responded. The pictures were not answers, they were invitations to pay attention, to look closely, to appreciate the immense softness with which the universe sometimes chose to reveal itself. And so the pictures continued to arrive, one faint whisper at a time, slipping gently into the receivers that waited like open palms. The gathering would go on, carried not by urgency but by curiosity and patience, allowing each new fragment to find its place among the growing constellation of meaning. In this quiet, ongoing process, the story unfolded not in sudden revelations, but in the slow, steady accumulation of light sent across the dark, reminding all who watched that even the faintest images could reshape the way a world learned to see. The task of choosing the 20 began quietly, without ceremony, in a room filled with long tables, softly humming equipment, and walls covered in faintly glowing screens. No one expected the selection to feel so weighty, yet the moment they gathered the complete archive of images, a certain stillness settled over the room. They knew that among the hundreds of pictures collected, only 20 would be allowed to carry the story forward. These 20 would speak for all the others, embodying the balance between clarity and mystery, between what was known and what was still trembling behind the veil of the unseen. Just realizing this made every breath in the room feel slower, more deliberate. There was no official system for the selection, no checklist strict enough to accommodate the subtleties woven into the images. Instead, the researchers approached the task like curators handling ancient relics, aware that each picture carried its own quiet gravity. The images were displayed across large screens, arranged in grids that seemed to pulse with silent intent. The team walked slowly among them, pausing at certain ones without immediately knowing why. They were not looking for perfection, the universe rarely offered that. They were looking for something deeper, a kind of resonance that lingered long after the eyes had moved on. At first, the team tried to categorize the images by structure, detail, and clarity. But the categories quickly dissolved as they realized each image refused to be placed neatly in a box. Some pictures were dim and grainy, yet carried an emotional pull that felt almost magnetic. Others were crisp and detailed but felt empty, as though their perfection concealed more than it revealed. Slowly, the team began to understand that the 20 could not be chosen purely through logic. Something intuitive needed to guide the process, a recognition of the pictures that carried stories within their silence. In long discussions that stretched deep into the evening, the researchers debated the importance of representation. Should the 20 reflect the full spectrum of cosmic conditions, from the smooth, untouched regions to the chaotic, noise-filled zones? Or should they highlight only the most extraordinary, the most startling images that emerged during the gathering? Each argument held weight. Each opinion carried a subtle truth. But the more they talked, the more they realized that the 20 needed to be chosen not for their grandeur, but for their ability to speak, however quietly, to something essential. There were moments when the team fell silent, simply staring at the images, letting the soft glow of the monitors wash over them. It was then that the selection began to feel less like a choice and more like a listening. Certain pictures seemed to call out gently, nudging the attention of those in the room. These images were not always the brightest or the most detailed. Often, they were the ones with faint imperfections, a small distortion, a delicate ripple of interference that hinted at the vast journey they had endured. Those imperfections made them feel alive, as though they carried the breath of the cosmos within their tiny frames. One of the first images chosen was a blurred, shimmering structure that none of the researchers could identify with certainty. It held no familiar shapes, no easy interpretations. Yet every time someone viewed it, they felt a strange calmness settle over them. It had the quality of a whisper frozen in light, a quiet murmur captured across unimaginable distances. It felt wrong to exclude it, even though no one could explain exactly why. The team realized that the 20 would not simply showcase understanding, they would also honor wonder. Another early selection was a picture warped heavily by gravitational distortion. It bent and twisted in unexpected ways, making it difficult to decipher. But the distortion itself told a story of passage, of how the image had brushed near something massive and invisible, how it had been shaped by an encounter with forces that humans could only sense indirectly. It felt like a record of movement through powerful, unseen landscapes. Its inclusion reminded everyone that the journey of the data was as significant as the content it carried. As the hours passed, the process became more intimate. Researchers found themselves returning to certain images repeatedly, drawn by a feeling they could not articulate. They began to compare notes, discovering that many of them had independently gravitated toward the same pictures. These shared instincts became the foundation of the selection. It was as though the images themselves were choosing, subtly guiding the hands and minds of those who observed them with genuine attentiveness. Eventually, the team recognized that each of the 20 needed to hold a different kind of space, one for clarity, one for distortion, one for silence, one for noise, one for the unexpected. The final collection needed to behave like a quiet conversation, each image reflecting something unique while supporting the others. Together, they would create a tapestry that felt complete without being overly resolved. They would allow viewers to rest in uncertainty while still feeling guided through it. In the midst of these considerations, a surprising candidate emerged, a nearly blank image that seemed, at first glance, to contain nothing at all. Most of the team dismissed it quickly, assuming it was a corrupted file or an artifact of interference. But one researcher insisted on studying it more closely. When magnified and processed with delicate filters, the faintest traces of structured patterns began to appear, so subtle they were almost invisible. This picture embodied the essence of the project, the idea that even the quietest signals could hold meaning. It earned its place among the 20. As the selection continued, the emotional atmosphere in the room shifted. The researchers felt the weight of stewardship, the responsibility of choosing images that would be seen not just as data, but as a reflection of something vast and incompletely understood. They worked slowly, unwilling to rush. Every addition to the 20 felt like a commitment, and every removal carried a touch of regret, as though leaving behind a voice that had whispered softly for attention. Some images were chosen because they held a kind of visual poetry, gradients that flowed like soft waves, textures that resembled the memory of movement, delicate sparkles that mimicked distant rainfall. These images reminded the researchers that the universe often communicated through aesthetics as much as through physical structure. They also grounded the set, offering moments of quiet beauty that balanced the more complex and challenging images. Other selections were made because the images contained anomalies the researchers couldn't yet explain. These anomalies were not mistakes, they were invitations to explore further. Including them meant accepting uncertainty as part of the story, acknowledging that the 20 were not answers but stepping stones. The anomalies added depth, creating spaces within the collection where viewers could linger, wondering, questioning, imagining. By the time the team had narrowed the selection to 30 candidates, the room had grown hushed, as though everyone could feel the threshold approaching. The last few choices felt the most difficult. These images were all compelling, all rich in subtle detail. But only 20 could remain. The researchers spread them across a final screen, letting their eyes drift slowly from one to the next, waiting for the sense of cohesion, that quiet internal click that would reveal which images belonged together. When the final 20 were assembled, the room felt different. A quiet recognition settled over everyone present. The images, now placed side by side, seemed to breathe together, forming a gentle rhythm. They did not tell a single, linear story. Instead, they held a constellation of meanings, inviting the viewer to wander through them with curiosity and patience. Each picture carried its own gravity, but together they formed a balanced field of understanding and wonder. Even after the official selection was made, some researchers lingered, staring at the 20 with soft, tired eyes. They realized that the act of choosing had changed their relationship with the images. These were no longer fragments of distant data, they had become companions, each carrying a secret of the universe, each asking to be seen with care. The selection process had created a bond between observer and observed, a quiet thread of connection that felt almost sacred. In the days that followed, the 20 were studied with a new level of attention. The team examined them from multiple angles, not to question the choices, but to understand the subtle interplay between them. They discovered connections they had not noticed during the selection, small echoes of shape or texture that traveled from one image to another, forming a larger pattern that had remained hidden until the 20 were placed together. These discoveries deepened their confidence that the 20 had chosen themselves more than they had been chosen. The images were then prepared for presentation, each cleaned gently without removing the marks of their cosmic journey. The distortions, streaks, and faint scars remained, acknowledged as part of their identity. The researchers understood that polishing them into perfection would strip away the authenticity that made them meaningful. Instead, they allowed the images to carry their histories openly, like travelers who wore the memory of miles in the folds of their clothing. During preparation, new insights emerged about how the images related to one another. Some seemed to form a sequence of movement, suggesting a path across unseen landscapes. Others echoed emotional tones, a softness mirrored between two images, or a tension reflected between another pair. These resonances gave the 20 a sense of quiet unity, as though they belonged to a single breath of the universe, divided into fragments and delivered gently across time and space. When the 20 were finally complete, ready to be shared, the researchers experienced a mix of pride and humility. Pride in the patience and care they had brought to the work. Humility in knowing that the images carried meanings far beyond anything they could fully interpret. They had gathered, chosen, and arranged them, but the deeper stories within the 20 would reveal themselves slowly, over time, to anyone willing to look closely. In the end, choosing the 20 became more than a task, it became a lesson in attention, in listening, in the delicacy of the universe's quiet offerings. It taught the team that meaning was not always found in the loudest or clearest signals, but in the small, steady whispers carried across distances that defied imagination. And as they prepared to send the 20 into the world, they carried with them the soft certainty that these images were not just pictures, but invitations to see, to wonder, and to follow the quiet threads of the unknown wherever they might lead. The quiet work of processing began in a room that never fully slept, a place where screens glowed softly regardless of the hour and where the hum of machines blended into a kind of steady, gentle breathing. Though nothing dramatic seemed to happen there, the room held an almost sacred significance. It was where the fragile data arriving in slivers, bruised by distance and cosmic interference, was coaxed into clarity. The work was patient, delicate, and often invisible to those who did not sit among the shifting graphs and murmuring processors. Yet it was here, in this soft-lit chamber, that the raw whispers of the universe were carefully turned into something the human mind could finally begin to understand. Processing was not one task but hundreds woven together, each step dependent on the precision of the one before it. The team began with cleaning, a process that resembled filtering dust from a beam of light. They removed the most obvious distortions, noise spikes, broken packets, fractured lines of static, but always with a cautious hand. Too much cleaning could erase meaning, as easily as wiping away the faint ink of an ancient manuscript. The machines helped, but the humans decided the thresholds. They trusted their eyes to sense when a streak was interference and when it was a truth struggling to be seen. The next phase involved alignment, where fragments that had arrived slightly out of order or slightly out of time were coaxed back into their proper sequence. This was a task that required equal parts logic and intuition. The data rarely arrived uniformly. Delays and interruptions had twisted it into uneven streams. Aligning these fragments was like matching the fading ends of multiple melodies and discovering where they overlapped. Each researcher learned to hear the rhythm of the data, to sense when one thread belonged after another, even if the raw numbers did not immediately agree. Once aligned, the fragments were layered, stacked gently like thin sheets of translucent glass, each piece adding depth or contrast to the structure beneath it. This layering revealed details that were impossible to see in any single file. Patterns emerged, faint arcs, soft gradients, tiny formations that seemed to shimmer with significance. The researchers leaned close during these moments, watching as the picture slowly unveiled itself. Sometimes a detail would appear suddenly, almost like a breath, an edge, a texture, a shift in brightness, and the room would fall completely silent as everyone took in the new shape forming before them. Some portions of the processing required immense patience. The algorithms designed to enhance subtle details often worked at an almost glacial pace, sifting through billions of data points to lift a faint signal out of the chaos surrounding it. It wasn't unusual for researchers to sit through entire nights, keeping watch over a single enhancement cycle. They'd sip warm drinks, stretch stiff shoulders, and stare at progress bars creeping forward at the speed of drifting shadows. Yet despite the slowness, there was something meditative about it, something grounding in knowing that the universe could not be rushed. Occasionally, the machines produced unexpected results, blurs that looked too organic, distortions that seemed too intentional. These anomalies often sent the team down long pathways of investigation. Were they mistakes? Were they artifacts of some unknown cosmic event? Sometimes they turned out to be simple errors, the kind that made everyone laugh with relief. Other times, they revealed structures the team hadn't anticipated, prompting long discussions about how best to interpret them without leaping to conclusions. The quiet work became a balance between skepticism and imagination. During the deepest stages of processing, the researchers often forgot the outside world. The room functioned like a small pocket of time with its own rhythm. Hours slipped by unnoticed as the team compared enhancements, debated color scales, adjusted weights, and cross-checked outputs on multiple machines. They spoke in calm tones, rarely raising their voices, not because of rules or pressure, but because the work itself encouraged gentleness. The data responded better to slow thinking than to haste, and the room gradually took on that same energy. One of the most delicate tasks involved reconstructing the sections damaged by interference. These parts contained information that had been stretched, torn, or scrambled during their cosmic journey. Repairing them was like piecing together a tapestry from threads scattered across a valley. Sometimes the missing sections could be inferred from surrounding patterns. Other times, the team needed to consult multiple images to rebuild the structure accurately. It often felt like translating a language that had only half its alphabet remaining, relying on instinct to fill in the silent gaps. Throughout this process, the team kept meticulous logs. Every adjustment, no matter how small, was recorded. They did this not for bureaucracy, but because transparency allowed future researchers to retrace their steps, to understand why a certain curve was brightened or why a faint halo was left unaltered. These logs became a quiet chronicle of their decisions, a written companion to the images themselves. Over time, the logs even began to mirror the emotional landscape of the project, filled with notes of uncertainty, relief, curiosity, and the rare but treasured moments of awe. On some days, the processing room felt like a place of pure logic. Numbers dominated the discussions, and every decision hinged on measurable thresholds. But on other days, especially when the images neared completion, the room felt strangely emotional. As the processed images took on clarity, they revealed textures that seemed almost alive, flowing patterns, intricate lattices, delicate shadows shaped by forces far older than any living thing. These moments reminded everyone that the work was not just technical, it was deeply human, rooted in the ancient desire to understand what lay beyond eyesight. Processing also required the team to revisit their assumptions repeatedly. An image that initially looked complete might reveal new inconsistencies when viewed under different enhancements. A halo that appeared intentional could later prove to be a trick of scattered particles. The team learned to accept revision as part of the process, to embrace the idea that the truth of an image was not fixed but emerged gradually, through layers of careful inquiry. The work felt like sculpting. Each pass refined the form, removing what did not belong, revealing what always had. There were moments when progress stalled entirely. A stubborn noise band might refuse to lift from the data, or an enhancement algorithm might amplify a distortion rather than clarify the signal. During these periods, frustration settled in like a fog. Yet even then, no one raised their voice. Instead, the team stepped back, took slow breaths, and allowed their minds to reset. They trusted that the data would open itself again once they approached it from a different angle. And almost always, it eventually did. One of the most remarkable aspects of the processing work was how seamlessly collaboration unfolded. Each researcher brought a different kind of attention. Some saw structure where others saw static, some could untangle timing issues intuitively, while others excelled at identifying subtle visual cues. The work became a woven effort, not unlike the images themselves. Their individual strengths blended into a collective understanding, and through that balance, the images grew more truthful and refined. As the processed versions neared completion, the team conducted long sessions where they compared the earliest raw fragments to the polished results. These sessions were not just technical reviews, they were reflections on how far each image had traveled from its faint arrival as scattered signals to its emergence as a coherent piece of cosmic insight. The researchers often found themselves leaning back, rubbing tired eyes, and allowing a quiet sense of accomplishment to settle over them. The work had been slow, sometimes tedious, but undeniably meaningful. There were instances when the processed images revealed details so delicate that the researchers sat in stunned silence. Lines that shimmered like distant ridges, soft gradients suggesting movement through dust or gas, shapes that hinted at structures yet unseen. These revelations reminded everyone why the quiet work mattered. Without the patient hours of cleaning, aligning, layering, and repairing, these fragile details would have remained lost in static. The processing room became a place where the universe's whispers were finally translated into form. Even the mistakes gained importance. Sometimes an incorrect filter created a false color effect that illuminated the underlying geometry in a way no true rendering could. These accidental insights often led the team to refine their tools or re-examine assumptions. It was a reminder that the path to clarity was not straight, but a looping, wandering progression through uncertainty. The mistakes were not setbacks, they were part of the dialogue between the data and the people trying to understand it. As the final stages approached, the team began merging the processed versions into a coherent archive. This archive would form the foundation for further study, allowing others to explore the images with fresh perspectives. Preparing this archive required yet another layer of care, ensuring color consistency, preserving original distortions where necessary, and marking areas where reconstruction had been speculative. The goal was not to create flawless beauty but honest representation, carrying the story of the data and its long journey intact. During the last few nights of processing, a deep tranquility settled over the room. The machines worked softly, their steady rhythms almost matching the breathing of those who watched them. The researchers moved slowly, deliberately, aware that these final touches would shape how the world would experience the images. The quiet work had become almost ceremonial, a culmination of the patience that had defined every step. When the final processed image appeared on the screen, a clean, radiant composition born from countless hours of care, the room fell silent in a way that felt different from every silence before it. This silence held recognition, gratitude, and a subtle sense of connection to something far beyond their small room. The image was not just a picture, it was the end of a long journey through space, noise, and human perseverance. Even after the processing was finished, the team lingered in the room, reluctant to leave the soft hum that had been their companion for so long. They knew that the world outside would see only the finished images, not the slow, quiet labor behind them. But they didn't mind. The work had never been about credit. It had been about listening, truly listening, to what the universe had whispered into their machines. In time, the processed images would travel far beyond this silent room. They would be analyzed, debated, admired, questioned. But the quiet work of processing, the hours of concentration, the subtle adjustments, the gentle respect for the fragile data would remain invisible, like the roots of a great tree. And perhaps that was fitting. For just as the universe often expressed itself in whispers rather than declarations, so too was the work that revealed its secrets meant to be soft, steady, and quietly devoted. The processed images, now ready to be shared, carried within them the long patience of their journey and of those who had tended to them. They were no longer raw fragments drifting through space. They were complete stories shaped by human care, waiting to be seen with the same attentiveness with which they had been revealed. In that way, the quiet work of processing did not end, it simply shifted, opening a new chapter for whoever would look next. In the beginning, when you let your eyes drift softly over the first of NASA's newly released images, the mind begins to settle into the gentle rhythm of distant geometry. The shapes stretch across the dark like quiet brushstrokes from an ancient painter, lifting themselves from the deep background of cosmic stillness. As you breathe slowly, you notice how these immense structures curve, spiral, or bloom outward, not with any urgency, but with the slow patience of things that have taken millions of years to become what they are. You almost feel the vastness leaning toward you, not to overwhelm, but simply to remind you that size, here, is a suggestion whispered through light rather than spoken aloud. The scale becomes a kind of lullaby, soft, steady, reminding you that the unhurried universe is always unfolding in its own time. Each cloud of dust seems to float in a dreamlike suspension, every star a small ember that glows with a warmth felt more by the imagination than the skin. As you gaze deeper, the boundaries between near and far dissolve into a gentle haze, like mist drifting across a quiet valley at dawn. You begin to understand that distances in space are not marched across, but drifted through, as though the cosmos itself were a slow river carrying you forward without asking anything from you at all. Slowly you begin to notice that shapes in these images are not simple outlines, they are the whispered storylines of ancient events. A long arc of gas might be the echo of a star that lived bright and then breathed its last, yet the curve it leaves behind looks peaceful, like a fingertip tracing a soft pattern on a fogged window. And even though the event may have been violent long ago, what remains now is serene, like the quiet leftovers of a distant storm that ended before humanity ever began to speak. The more time you spend with the images, the more you sense how delicately everything is connected. A faint line of light stretching across the scene becomes a thread between worlds, holding regions together like stitches in a cosmic quilt. The comforting thought settles in: the universe is vast, yes, but it is also woven with care, each section flowing gently into the next, whispering through the silence of distances your mind can touch but never fully measure. When you breathe in, imagine that you're drawing in some small fraction of the starlight captured by the instruments, light that has traveled for tens of thousands of years to softly rest in your awareness. That simple act makes shape and scale something more than measurements, they become sensations. A spiral galaxy becomes the slow turning of a distant wheel, something ancient but unhurried, moving in a rhythm so gentle that your heartbeat almost aligns with its rotation. As you let your thoughts drift further, the scale of everything begins to feel less intimidating and more soothing, like standing at the edge of a calm sea. You know there are depths far below, regions unexplored, but the surface, smooth and broad, feels like a blanket laid across the world. The images, in their quiet precision, remind you that even the largest structures in the universe exist in harmony, balancing their shapes the way leaves balance on a still pond. A long, stretched-out nebula fades across one image like a soft stroke of smoke, drifting lazily, without any urgency. If you lean into that imagery, you can almost feel the softness brushing across your thoughts. And as it stretches, it teaches you scale gently, showing that distances in space are not abrupt cliffs but long, quiet meadows of starlight and gas. Each part blends into the next the way evening blends into night, slowly, imperceptibly, and without ever needing to hurry. There is a comfort in observing shapes that could never form on Earth. Their strangeness is soothing, like listening to a lullaby sung in a language you don't understand but still find calming. Some clusters form gentle arcs, some form faint halos, and some stretch into wispy filaments that look like strands of silver hair drifting underwater. These forms feel ancient, timeless, and they lull the mind into a soft stillness, reminding you that not everything must be comprehended at once. With every new image, your understanding of scale shifts. What seemed large becomes small when compared with some distant swirl of stars, and what seemed small becomes enormous when set against the delicate background glow. But the shifts don't unsettle you, they cradle you, inviting you to float in a space where size has no sharp edges. Everything expands and contracts in the quiet rhythm of cosmic breathing, and you drift along with it. The way the stars cluster together feels deliberate, almost like the universe arranging its lights to guide wanderers through the deeper dark. But there is also randomness in their placements, gentle, natural randomness that creates patterns without forcing them. It is the kind of pattern you might notice in the branches of trees when you lie beneath them on a slow afternoon, watching sunlight spill through the leaves. When clouds of dust curve into delicate waves, you may find your thoughts sinking into them as though they are soft blankets. These dusty regions, illuminated by starlight, shimmer faintly in the images, and every grain becomes a tiny reminder that even the largest structures are built from small, patient pieces. And just as grains of sand build dunes over ages, the universe builds its vast shapes with time instead of haste. Sometimes you will see one star shining brighter than the rest, anchoring the entire scene with its steady glow. But the brightness is never harsh, it is gentle, like a candle placed far away in a quiet room. That distant glow draws your eyes in, giving you a sense of direction in the boundless dark, helping you understand how the scale stretches in all directions without ever feeling empty. In other images, shapes form through interactions, galaxies brushing past each other like two travelers exchanging a slow nod on a quiet road. Their motions leave trails, arcs, and softened distortions that tell silent stories of gravitational pulls and long dances. Even the disturbances become elegant, teaching you that shape and scale are not fixed, but ever-changing, gently sculpted by cosmic tides. There are images where entire regions glow softly in arcs of blue or red, each color revealing something about temperature, composition, or motion. Yet, even when the science behind these hues is precise and detailed, the visual impression remains soothing, like watching the sky fade from sunset to twilight. You don't need to break it down, you only need to let it wash over you. The scale of a glowing cloud might feel immense, but the softness of its edges makes it approachable, almost tender. The boundaries are never sharp, they blur into the surrounding dark as though the cloud is settling into sleep itself. Looking at it, you may find your breath slowing, matching the gentle fade of light into shadow. When you encounter an image filled with countless tiny points of light, the first impression might be of great numbers, but soon it becomes something else, something gentler. Those countless stars no longer feel like a crowd, they feel like a gentle snowfall across the night sky, each point drifting softly into place over unimaginable stretches of time. Some shapes appear as though they are moving delicately, slowly, though you know they are frozen in the frame. A jet of light stretches across the darkness like a slow exhale, and you can almost imagine the star releasing that breath over centuries. The motion you feel is imagined, but the calming effect is real, helping the mind ease out of its waking tension. With each image, your sense of scale becomes more internal than external. The universe stops being something out there and becomes something that wraps around your awareness like a quiet cloak. Instead of measuring distance, you begin sensing it, feeling the stretch, the ease, the tranquil expanse that holds everything without strain. Sometimes the shapes resemble familiar things, petals, feathers, ripples on water, and these similarities bring comfort. It's as though the universe is speaking through symbols you already know, translating its incomprehensible scale into images that feel soft enough to rest your thoughts upon. In some frames, darkness dominates most of the space, with only a few small structures glowing gently. But that darkness does not feel empty. It feels restful. It is the kind of darkness that invites quiet reflection, an uncluttered space where the mind can float freely, letting go of noise and urgency. As you continue through the collection, you begin to realize that shape and scale are not lessons you learn once, they are lessons that deepen with each slow gaze. The universe is patient with you, offering its truths like soft stepping stones across a wide, still lake. You take each step at your own pace, and the lake remains calm beneath you. The edges of nebulae often curl like soft tendrils of mist. These curves make the vast clouds feel almost alive, not with motion, but with presence. It's a comforting presence, like the gentle rise and fall of someone breathing beside you in a room darkened for sleep. You begin to understand that space is not empty, it is filled with quiet, steady companionship. Farther into the sequence, you may encounter structures shaped by ancient forces, supernova remnants expanding outward in slow, delicate waves. Though the origins were explosive, the remnants now drift in calm diffusion, teaching you that even the loudest moments of the universe eventually fall into soft, lingering quiet. Sometimes the shape of a cluster seems almost symmetrical, balanced in a way that feels intentional even though it is born of randomness and gravity. This symmetry brings an unexpected peace, like noticing patterns in clouds during a slow afternoon. It reminds you that the universe often settles into harmony, even without any guiding hand. The scale of the larger formations begins to blur into an almost meditative abstraction, something too large to hold in the mind and therefore too gentle to disturb it. As you let the vastness spill across your thoughts, your mind softens its grip on worries and begins to drift, carried by light that traveled millions of years to meet you here. In the final images, shape and scale combine into a quiet, cosmic lullaby. Every curve of gas, every distant star, every halo of dust becomes part of a tapestry so broad and serene that your thoughts naturally slow, your breath settles, and your awareness begins to dim into restfulness. And as you linger there, at the soft edge of sleep, the universe feels less like something far away and more like a vast, gentle presence cradling you in its silent arms. The quiet truth about color in space is that it rarely behaves the way our eyes expect, and this realization often drifts into the minds of scientists who spend long nights examining raw data that looks more like coded whispers than vibrant scenes. In these still hours, when the instruments hum their soft, steady notes, they begin to understand that color is not simply something to be seen, but something to be interpreted, translated, and carefully unraveled. Much of what arrives from distant worlds comes stripped of hue, delivered as grayscale signals shaped by the sensitivity of a sensor, the angle of sunlight, and the invisible filters of space itself. The scientists sit before these pale mosaics knowing that what they eventually reveal must be honest, but honesty itself is a complex thing when the universe speaks in wavelengths rather than pigments. Color is often built slowly, the way a shy memory forms in the fog of early morning, gathering fragments that only later become coherent. The raw images sent back from orbiters and rovers seldom contain the colors people imagine. Instead, they emerge as quiet fields of numerical brightness, waiting for the right equations to coax them into visual meaning. A scientist may lean back in their chair, rubbing tired eyes while the monitor glows faintly, showing a world that looks nearly silent, devoid of the life and richness one expects. Yet they know the truth is still hidden in the data, like a melody trapped behind a closed door. They must decide how to bring that melody forward without changing its tune. Even when color data exists, it arrives in pieces, single filter captures, each representing a narrow slice of light that the sensor can register. Only when these slices are combined do shapes and tones bloom, but combining them requires patience and a steady hand. One filter might show the harsh brightness of reflected sun, another the softness of shadows carved by dust, and a third the faint echo of minerals waiting to be recognized. The scientists move these layers into alignment with care, aware that a slight misplacement can create phantom hues, misleading tints that drift like mirages across an otherwise faithful landscape. Some colors are real but invisible to us, residing in wavelengths our eyes cannot detect, like ultraviolet or near-infrared light that dances beyond our natural reach. When these wavelengths are translated into visible colors, the process feels almost like diplomacy reaching across boundaries to find a language that humans can understand. Scientists must choose how to map these hidden signals into tones that are familiar, yet still representative of the underlying truth. Too bold a choice risks turning a scientific record into a fantasy, too cautious, and the beauty of the discovery remains locked away. Occasionally, color is not added but revealed through subtraction, by removing distortions caused by dust, scattered light, or the lingering traces of a camera's imperfections. This work resembles cleaning an ancient artifact, brushing away the interference that time has deposited upon it. It requires an understanding of both physics and patience, because the removal must be gentle. One wrong adjustment can wash out meaning, like overscrubbing paint from a priceless mural. But when done carefully, the world beneath emerges with delicate clarity, subtle and quiet, as if it had simply been waiting to breathe. On other nights, the color must be corrected for lighting that behaves in unsettling ways. In space, illumination does not scatter like it does on Earth, and shadows fall with an unfamiliar sharpness that can make objects appear deceptively flat or strangely bright. A scientist adjusts the tones the way a musician tunes an instrument, small, attentive steps that bring the scene closer to what an observer would naturally perceive. These adjustments are not cosmetic, they serve to restore balance to the world shown in the image, giving depth back to surfaces and allowing textures to be seen without the harsh exaggeration of unfiltered light. Sometimes, though, scientists intentionally use false color to reveal features that the human eye could never distinguish. This technique does not seek to deceive but to illuminate, turning invisible differences into visible patterns. A barren plain may appear in shades of blue and gold, not because the ground truly glows that way, but because these hues highlight the varying mineral compositions beneath. False color becomes a tool of discovery, showing the landscape not as it looks, but as it behaves. In these moments, color becomes a form of translation, allowing us to understand secrets that ordinary vision would overlook. In certain cases, the color chosen is meant to show change, dust storms swelling across a planet, temperature shifts along crater walls, or the slow migration of frost at dawn. These temporal stories require contrast, subtle gradients that reveal the movement of time itself. Scientists work slowly, adjusting hues until the progression becomes clear, almost like watching a heartbeat unfold across a screen. The resulting colors may not match everyday expectations, yet they faithfully trace the rhythm of the world being observed. The challenge deepens when trying to match colors to human memory or imagination, especially when the subject is something people have never seen directly. A sky on another planet might not be blue. A sunset might not bleed into orange. A rock might not hold the earthy warmth we associate with stone. Scientists must choose whether to present an image that feels familiar, or one that is faithful to the foreign physics of that world. And often, they lean toward honesty, even if that honesty feels cold or strange. At times, color work involves grappling with uncertainty. When data is incomplete, if a filter failed, or the lighting changed unexpectedly, the missing hues must be interpreted with caution. A scientist may sit with the partial results, contemplating what is known and what remains unknowable. They may choose to leave parts of the image in neutral tones rather than guess. In doing so, they respect the limits of the data, acknowledging that silence can be more truthful than speculation. There are moments when scientists must revisit older color reconstructions, armed with newer methods or more accurate models of how light behaves on alien surfaces. They return to these images with a gentleness that mirrors revisiting old memories, adjusting tones slightly, refining shades, allowing the image to come closer to what the world would truly look like. The changes are sometimes subtle, barely noticeable to the untrained eye, but for those who understand the process, they feel like the correction of a long-held misunderstanding. Color can also be affected by the materials of the spacecraft itself. Dust clinging to lenses, aging sensors, or the gradual drift of calibration can introduce tiny shifts that echo through the data. Scientists compensate for these factors the way restorers compensate for the discoloration of old film. They apply knowledge of how the hardware changes over time, restoring the intended neutrality of the instrument so that the colors reflect the world rather than the machine viewing it. In many images, color choices must walk a line between accessibility and purity. Scientists want the public to understand the scene without needing specialized training, yet they also want to avoid simplifying the data too much. The resulting compromise is a balance, a palette that conveys truth without becoming overwhelming. The colors must invite, not confuse, allowing viewers to find meaning without losing accuracy. There is a quiet beauty in the fact that color, though often associated with emotion and art, becomes a scientific instrument in this context. It guides the eye to features that matter, helps reveal differences that numbers alone cannot convey, and transforms distant landscapes into something our minds can engage with. The scientists know that the colors they craft will be the ones people remember, the ones that shape how the world imagines distant places. The process can be deeply meditative. While adjusting hues pixel by pixel, a scientist might sense a calm settling over the workspace, the gentle glow of the monitor illuminating the edges of papers and notebooks scattered nearby. The task becomes a slow-breathing rhythm, a patient shaping of light and shadow into something coherent. This quiet atmosphere becomes part of the image itself, a hidden layer of stillness that the viewer may never know but somehow feels. Sometimes, a single pixel's color matters more than one might expect. That pixel may represent a mineral of scientific importance, a temperature anomaly, or a surface change that hints at processes long hidden. Scientists zoom in until the pixel becomes a world of its own, adjusting its tone with deliberate care. This attention reflects a respect for the data, a recognition that even the smallest fragment holds meaning in the vastness of space exploration. There are times when color reconstructions reveal something unexpected, an unusual tint on a slope, a glimmer of frost where none was anticipated, or a pattern in the soil that hints at geological activity. These discoveries feel like whispers from the world itself, subtle messages that only emerge once the colors align correctly. Scientists sit quietly in these moments, absorbing the revelation before moving forward. Even when color is accurate, perception varies from person to person. What one viewer sees as warm, another may see as muted. This variability reminds scientists that color is not just a physical wavelength but also a human experience. They cannot control how each individual interprets the tones, but they can present them as faithfully as possible, trusting that the essence of the scene will be understood. The universe often defies familiar palettes. A sky tinted by alien dust, a horizon shaped by unfamiliar chemistry, or a surface reflecting light differently than anything on Earth, these phenomena challenge the assumptions viewers bring. Scientists present these strange hues without apology, allowing the unfamiliarity to stand as part of the truth. In doing so, they help broaden the boundaries of what people imagine is possible. Some scientists describe their work with color as a form of listening. They listen to the data, to the subtle indications of wavelength and intensity, and allow those clues to guide their choices. This listening is not literal, but a metaphor for the attention required, the patience to let the image reveal itself rather than forcing it into preconceived expectations. It is a slow unfolding, a story told in gradients rather than words. Late in the process, scientists often compare the final color rendering with their earliest drafts, noticing how small adjustments have transformed the scene. The difference can feel like the difference between a distant acquaintance and a familiar friend, subtle, yet profound. The world in the image seems more present now, more complete, as though it finally has a voice of its own. Once the colors are finalized, the image begins its journey outward toward researchers, publications, classrooms, and curious minds scattered across the globe. The scientists release it quietly, without fanfare, trusting that the careful choices woven into its hues will speak for themselves. They know that most viewers will never realize how much effort went into shaping each tone, but that does not diminish the satisfaction of the work. As the image reaches more eyes, the colors start to take on meanings beyond science. They inspire art, shape imagination, and spark questions that ripple outward. A single shade of gold or rust or violet might linger in someone's thoughts, encouraging them to learn more or simply marvel at the universe's quiet intricacies. In that way, the colors live on, extending far beyond the lab where they were born. And when the scientists finally step away from their screens, stretching their hands and letting the room fall into darkness, they carry with them the gentle awareness that color, in the end, is not merely something applied to an image. It is a bridge between wavelengths and eyes, between data and understanding, between distant worlds and the minds trying to know them. Here, in this quiet merging of science and subtle artistry, color becomes something deeper than appearance. It becomes a way of listening to the universe. Every image that emerges from the vast reaches of space carries the hidden story of the instruments that captured it. These devices are far more than cameras. They are finely tuned extensions of human curiosity, designed to perceive what the naked eye cannot. In quiet labs and control rooms, scientists spend years calibrating, testing, and reconfiguring them, aware that even the smallest misalignment could alter the story the image tells. The instruments themselves hum softly, their circuitry alive with anticipation, translating photons that have traveled millions of miles into data that humans can interpret. Each instrument is a bridge, a delicate mediator between the distant cosmos and our understanding of it. These instruments often begin their lives as conceptual dreams, sketched on paper or simulated in computer models long before they ever leave Earth. Engineers debate materials, sensitivity ranges, and lens shapes with painstaking precision. Every choice has consequences. A sensor optimized for infrared may miss subtle features in visible light, while a wide-angle lens might sacrifice detail at the edges of an image. The design process is iterative, almost like composing a musical score where every note must harmonize with countless others. By the time an instrument is ready for launch, it is both marvelously specific and astonishingly adaptable, capable of capturing data that will astonish even those who created it. Once launched, the instruments face conditions no one could fully replicate on Earth. Radiation streams batter their circuits, extreme temperatures threaten to warp sensitive lenses, and the constant vibration of a spacecraft's engines tugs subtly at their alignment. Engineers design for resilience, layering shielding and redundant systems, but even with every precaution, the instruments experience stress during their journey. Monitoring their health becomes an ongoing task, a delicate vigilance that continues throughout the mission. Every pixel they record carries the imprint of both the distant world and the instrument that bore witness. The complexity of these instruments lies not only in their construction but in the synchronization of their components. Sensors must work in harmony with filters, lenses, and detectors. Shutters must open and close at precise moments, timing exposures to the infinitesimal fraction of a second. Even the software controlling the instrument is a carefully choreographed dance, translating commands from Earth into physical actions across millions of kilometers. A tiny delay or misinterpretation could distort the incoming data, turning a sharp ridge into a blurry smear or a faint crater into a ghostly shadow. Calibration is a continuous process, both before and during the mission. On Earth, engineers use standardized light sources and reference targets to ensure each component behaves predictably. In space, calibration becomes trickier, requiring clever techniques to account for the unpredictable nature of light, dust, and the shifting orientation of the spacecraft. Scientists observe reference stars or known planetary features, comparing the instrument's readings to expectations and adjusting computational models accordingly. Each correction is subtle but crucial, ensuring the images reflect the reality of distant landscapes rather than artifacts of imperfect machinery. Some instruments are designed to observe specific phenomena, and their specialization defines the kinds of images they produce. Infrared sensors reveal heat patterns and mineral compositions invisible to the eye, while ultraviolet cameras can highlight the faint glows of gases or chemical reactions. Radar-based instruments penetrate surface layers, mapping structures hidden beneath dust or ice. Each instrument translates the language of the cosmos into a dialect humans can interpret, allowing previously invisible processes to become observable patterns. Together, these tools form a symphony of perception, each contributing a different tonal quality to the final picture. The size and orientation of instruments also affect the images they capture. A telescope with a large aperture can gather more light, resolving finer details, while a smaller lens may require longer exposures to detect the faintest features. Instruments mounted on rotating platforms must track movements across a planet's surface with precision, compensating for the spacecraft's speed, tilt, and trajectory. Tiny errors in motion can blur an image, spreading detail into uncertainty. Scientists spend hours simulating these dynamics to ensure that every pixel represents the correct location and orientation in the scene. Despite the sophistication of these tools, they are not infallible. Cosmic rays can introduce random noise, electronics can glitch, and environmental conditions may introduce subtle distortions. Researchers learn to recognize these signatures, distinguishing between true surface features and artifacts caused by the instrument itself. This discernment is a skill honed over years, a dialogue between human intuition and mechanical output. Without it, images could mislead rather than illuminate, turning science into conjecture rather than discovery. Data acquisition is another intricate component of the process. Instruments do not record static pictures in the way a handheld camera does. They capture streams of data, often in multiple wavelengths and exposures, which are then transmitted back to Earth in packets. These packets may arrive out of order, corrupted, or incomplete due to the vast distances and interference along the transmission path. Engineers design protocols to verify integrity, correct errors, and reassemble the fragments into coherent datasets. Each step ensures that the image, when finally reconstructed, reflects the intended observation. Some instruments require active intervention, like scanning beams or movable lenses, to cover wide areas or focus on specific features. These maneuvers are often choreographed from Earth, with scientists predicting the position of the spacecraft and the target feature, accounting for orbital motion, light delay, and rotational dynamics. Timing is critical. An error of even a few milliseconds can result in misalignment, producing images that are skewed or incomplete. The coordination between human operators and automated controls is a subtle, high-stakes partnership. The instrument's sensitivity is another crucial factor. They must detect extremely faint light against the backdrop of darkness, often capturing signals that are billions of times weaker than the sunlight reflected from nearby planets. Noise filtering and signal amplification are delicate processes, balancing the need to reveal faint features without introducing false patterns. This sensitivity allows the instruments to capture details invisible to casual observation, revealing textures, formations, and anomalies that redefine our understanding of distant worlds. Temperature regulation is another invisible but vital task. Sensors and lenses can be affected by slight thermal expansions or contractions, which may subtly shift the focus or alignment. Cooling systems, radiators, and thermal shields work tirelessly to maintain stability. Engineers design these systems to endure long-term exposure to extreme conditions, knowing that even minor temperature fluctuations could compromise the integrity of the images. The care taken to stabilize these instruments is as important as the lenses or sensors themselves. Many instruments also work in tandem with complementary devices. A visual camera may be paired with a spectrometer to measure chemical composition, or a radar sensor may accompany a thermal imager to reveal subsurface features. These collaborations allow multiple dimensions of data to converge in a single analysis. Scientists interpret the cross-referenced information to build more accurate, nuanced representations of distant landscapes, combining the insights of each instrument into a unified understanding. Instruments are not just mechanical or electronic, they are extensions of human perception. Each choice in design reflects what scientists value most: resolution, range, sensitivity, or robustness. These choices determine the nature of discovery, highlighting certain features while downplaying others. No instrument can capture everything. Each is a lens of focus, a channel of attention. Recognizing these limitations is as important as the images they produce, reminding us that observation is always mediated by the tools we construct. The instruments themselves have histories. Many are adaptations of earlier designs, improved incrementally over decades. Lessons learned from previous missions, failures and successes alike, inform the next generation of devices. Engineers carry forward knowledge about material fatigue, sensor drift, radiation tolerance, and calibration methods. Each instrument is therefore a living legacy of prior exploration, a culmination of experience passed quietly from one mission to the next. Power supply is an often overlooked factor that profoundly influences instrument performance. Instruments rely on carefully regulated electricity to maintain consistent operation, and fluctuations can introduce noise or reduce sensitivity. Spacecraft carry batteries, solar panels, and redundant circuits to ensure uninterrupted function. Engineers monitor power levels constantly, adjusting schedules and usage to protect the instruments and maximize the quality of data collected. Every image is, in part, a testament to stable, controlled energy flow. Data compression also plays a critical role. Because transmission bandwidth is limited, instruments often compress raw signals before sending them across millions of kilometers. Compression algorithms must preserve the fidelity of the signal while reducing size. Improper compression could erase subtle details, losing faint textures that reveal geological or atmospheric phenomena. Scientists design and test these algorithms rigorously, knowing that the preservation of minute features may be key to major discoveries. The mechanical design of instruments also demands attention to vibration and stability. Launch vibrations can be intense, and even the slightest internal movement can shift components or damage delicate detectors. Engineers employ dampeners, shock absorbers, and careful mounting techniques to protect sensitive elements. Throughout the mission, this structural resilience ensures that each captured photon lands precisely where it should, forming images that remain faithful over time. Software is equally critical. Instruments depend on complex programs to control exposure, alignment, timing, and data storage. Bugs or miscalculations in code can produce subtle errors in images, sometimes unnoticed until months later. Continuous testing, simulation, and verification ensure that the instruments perform reliably. The software and hardware function as a single entity, seamlessly translating distant photons into measurable, interpretable signals. Remote troubleshooting is another layer of complexity. When anomalies arise, scientists must diagnose issues without direct access. They rely on telemetry, diagnostic routines, and simulations to understand instrument behavior. Adjustments are often made via commands sent across millions of kilometers, a delicate conversation with a device that responds only through signals and data streams. This interaction requires deep knowledge, patience, and a trust in both technology and process. Environmental factors beyond the instrument's control still play a role. Cosmic radiation, solar flares, dust storms, and micrometeoroid impacts can affect performance. Scientists model these influences, predicting potential disruptions and designing mitigation strategies. The instruments are resilient, but the universe is unpredictable, and each image carries the subtle mark of these encounters. Interpreting images thus requires an understanding of both the instrument and its environment. Despite all these challenges, instruments excel at their task. The precision and care invested in their design, calibration, and operation allow us to perceive worlds that would otherwise remain abstract. Each pixel of a transmitted image embodies countless hours of engineering, computation, and vigilance. The instruments are silent collaborators, translating the raw whispers of distant landscapes into something humans can study, interpret, and marvel at. Even after years of deployment, instruments continue to surprise. Sensors may detect unexpected phenomena, cameras may reveal textures unpredicted by simulations, and filters may uncover features previously thought invisible. Each surprise reminds scientists that the instruments are not just tools but partners in exploration, capable of revealing the universe in ways even the designers could not fully anticipate. The images themselves, once processed and studied, carry the signature of the instruments in every detail. The angle of light, the spread of noise, the faint traces of distortion, all are fingerprints of the devices that captured them. Understanding these signatures allows researchers to interpret images accurately, distinguishing between what is real in the landscape and what is introduced by the observing system. This knowledge is as critical as the images themselves. Finally, the instruments embody the ambition and patience of humanity. They traverse vast distances, endure harsh environments, and return fragments of distant worlds to our understanding. Every successful image is a testament not only to distant landscapes but to the ingenuity, care, and persistent curiosity of the people who designed, built, and operated the instruments. In these silent, precise devices, we see both the universe and ourselves, reflected in the delicate work of observation and the relentless pursuit of knowledge. Each instrument, in essence, is a storyteller. Though it speaks in photons and electrons, it conveys tales of light and shadow, of surfaces and textures, of processes unfolding over eons. And as we receive these stories through the images it produces, we recognize that the instruments are more than mechanical constructs. They are extensions of our capacity to wonder, to explore, and to translate the silent language of the cosmos into forms we can finally behold and contemplate.